Sometimes we get in trouble in our lives, not because of what we don't know, but because of what we forget. We do get in trouble because of things that we don't know, but we know a lot, and we forget a lot. Jeannie and I went last weekend to her class reunion, her high school class reunion. I think it's the third one that we've been to, but there were 20 years, I think, in between the one we went to before and this one. And so people age and change, and sometimes memories weaken a little bit. So as we were driving over to Stevens Point, Wisconsin, Jeannie had her yearbook out, trying to remember. And it was, if you've been to a class reunion, realize that there were a lot of people that you knew maybe a little bit at that point in time, but they're pretty obscure. And then the ones that you did know, you wonder if you're going to recognize them when you see them at the class reunion. So there's a little bit of trepidation about, what if I see somebody and don't recognize him? At her class reunion, fortunately, the name tags had, some of you know what I'm going to say, had the picture from their high school yearbook on it. And so you could look at the person in person, look at their name, look at the picture, and go, oh, yeah, I recognize you. And the good thing about it was also those of us who were spouses didn't have a picture. So we knew that we were talking to somebody that didn't know anybody else either at the class reunion. And so the danger of forgetting things that were meaningful at one point in time. I was telling this to some friends of ours a couple days ago who are a bit younger, and she was talking about going to, I think, her 10th reunion or something like that, and her husband and one other husband from outside the class that were going decided they'd pull a little trick on the people in the class. And they'd go up and talk to people and say, oh, I think you were in my physics class. Do you remember how tough physics was? And that physics teacher was just a bear. And these people are looking at him and going, I don't remember you. And he wasn't in the class. It reminded me also of the 15th year class reunion that I went to for my class. And I had been an officer in our class, elected by the class, and I was talking to some people, and this one guy came up to me and said, weren't you something in our class? That's a way of humbling us as we move on with our lives. But God's people had a problem often, not because of what they knew at some point in time, but what they forgot, and especially consistently forgot about their Lord. And so in Isaiah 40, 27 through 31 that Mark just read, there are some rhetorical questions that are included in this to get them to ponder what it is that they're forgetting. But let me give you a little background first to remind us of where we are. We have divided up Isaiah 40 into 3 sermons. And this is the one at the end, obviously. But I want to remind us that chapter 40 starts a new unfolding in the writings of Isaiah and the book of Isaiah. David referred to this when he got into Isaiah 40. And chapters 38 and 39 are a transition. Because before that time, in particular, Assyria had been the major empire of the world, and the one that Israel and Judah accommodated at some points in time and was their particularly strong nemesis. But in Isaiah 38 and 40 with Hezekiah, this new Babylonian king comes on the scene, and Hezekiah gets in trouble for showing this Babylonian king all of his storehouse and, in effect, what he was depending on, in a sense, maybe to cozy up to this new Babylonian king. When chapter 40 starts, it starts with the concept of Babylon being the world empire instead of Assyria. And it doesn't lay that out for us really specifically as we get into these chapters of 40 through 55 in particular. But we will see as these chapters go on that Babylon has come to the fore, and captivity becomes a reality for Judah as it had for the northern kingdom of Samaria. But King Hezekiah died in about 686 BC. Isaiah ministered through 4 kings, Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. We don't know exactly when Hezekiah died, but it was sometime after Hezekiah died in his reign. Babylon conquered Judah in 586 and took them into captivity. So with Hezekiah's death around 686, we have 100 years before Judah is taken into captivity. But these chapters from Isaiah 40 onward speak with the sense of captivity. What more liberal scholars have done with this in the past have said that these chapters, in fact, are written while in captivity 100 years later. Therefore, they cannot have been written by Isaiah. But Isaiah was a prophet. And some of the very particular details of the kings of Assyria and the various cities that are described up to chapter 39 begin to dissipate a little bit, because he is writing prophetically without all the historical details of the current time. But he's writing prophetically about what is going to happen to the people of God, in a sense, as if they are in captivity. And so that's where we come to with Isaiah chapter 40, this last part. And let's look at verse 27. There are 3 points on your outline. The first point talks about forgetting what we have known, but I'd like for you to write down a little subpoint if you're writing notes, and it's a question. And the question is, why do you say these things? And Isaiah is saying this to God's people. You remember last week that John Gustafson took us through a great panorama of the attributes of God. And in the heels of that, this question comes in verse 27. Why do you say, the NIV has complain, why do you say, O Jacob, and speak, O Israel? Before we go further, let me just set the stage. He is saying to them, why do you say these things about your God and your relationship with Him and how He is dealing with you? In our difficulties, sometimes we ask the wrong questions. Sometimes we fear the wrong things. We have been presented year after year in our lives with the wonder of God. Why do we get anxious so often? Why do we fear the things across our path? We know much, but we forget in our current circumstances, who is God to us? And so in verse 27, why do you say, O Jacob, and speak, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord. I remember years back reading Isaiah, and I read that verse, and sometimes in the Psalms, the psalmist will accuse the people of Israel of saying, God doesn't know what I'm doing, so I'm not really in jeopardy because he doesn't know. That's not the case here. They're saying, my way is hidden from the Lord. He doesn't know the difficulties that we're going through. Or he doesn't care. Or he isn't good to me. My way is hidden from the Lord. The Hebrew language is different from Greek and English and Latin in a number of ways, but particularly in the idea of tenses in the Hebrew. The idea of tenses is not clear in Hebrew. The context gives that. But Hebrew has two aspects or two modes. One is the imperfect mode and one is the perfect mode. And the imperfect mode means something that's incomplete, not set, not settled, potentially continuous. The perfect mode has the idea of something that is settled and set. This question in verse 27 is written in the imperfect mode or aspect in Greek, and we might say it, why do you continue to say that my way is hidden from the Lord? He doesn't know, he doesn't understand, or he doesn't care, or he's not good. Back a number of years ago when Jeannie and I were on Campus Crusade staff, or the organization formerly known as Campus Crusade for Christ, and we were at staff training out in Colorado, in Fort Collins, on the campus there of CSU, and there were a group of leadership women, all single women within the movement, who met at a ranch in between Loveland and Estes Park, Colorado, at sort of the foot of this great big, huge Big Thompson Canyon. They met at a place called Sylvandale Ranch for a meeting before the larger meetings came into effect. There was a treacherous thunderstorm that erupted up high in the mountains around the Estes Park area, and a flash flood developed and came rushing through the high-banked rock walls of the Big Thompson Canyon. It was nighttime when this was happening. The state police sought to find people who were up there and escort them out. And so 2 cars of women followed a state patrol car down this 2-lane roadway across a little narrow bridge that was seemingly inconspicuous in the midst of fields that opened up at that point. At that point in time, the headwaters of the surging flood came through and washed those 3 cars out into the river. I think there were 10 women in the cars. All of them died except 2. I visited those 2 in the hospital. One was a particular friend of mine that worked on our team. And as we thought about that, and even as Jeannie and I went back to that spot in the roadway of this really small bridge that sort of had a little culvert that went under it, it was just at that point that this wall of water surged through. And as Jeannie was interacting about this with somebody else she knew well, she said, "Isn't it amazing in God's overarching sovereignty that water and those cars just crossed at that particular time?" In other words, a sense of not really understanding what God's plan was in that, but recognizing his sovereignty. And the friend to whom she was saying that, this was not God's doing, she said, this was Satan's doing. And surely there's truth in that. Satan seeks to kill and destroy, and these were prime servants of the Lord, reaching and discipling college women. But yet her perspective was, in a sense, God had nothing to do with this. It was Satan. Or in other words, Satan won, and either God didn't care, or he didn't know, or he wasn't good if Satan won in that circumstance. Isaiah asked the people of Israel, "Why do you say, O Jacob, and speak, my way is hidden from the Lord?" But the second question follows. He said, "And my right is disregarded by my God." This is the same word that's used, I think, 43 times in the book of Isaiah for justice. It's the Hebrew word mishpat. And it's translated here in this, my right. I think the New American Standard has justice. And so the people are not only saying, God doesn't see what I'm going through and by implication doesn't care. Besides that, he's not giving me what I should have, what I'm due. Do you remember the context of why this chapter is written and why this book is written? Because the people have rebelled against holy God and have gone their own way and sought their own things and worshiped other gods and lived in pride. This is written with the idea of captivity in mind, and the people are saying, my rights aren't being guarded by God, they're being disregarded by him. And Isaiah says, why do you say these things? Why do you say my way is hidden and my rights are being disregarded by God? In a sense, Isaiah is saying, no fair. Back when our kids were growing up, all the boys wound up getting into skateboarding. And, there are a variety of different brands that people wear on their T-shirts. Some of them on the underside of their skateboards, or they're just companies and brands that they advertise. Back then, there was a brand in T-shirts called No Fear. Anybody remember that? Well, around our house and among a number of other kids that we have been around, the phrase no fair would seem to come to the fore in our house. So Jeannie had a great idea that we were going to market a new brand of T-shirts called No Fair and market them to kids, and then we thought we would undermine the whole family structure if we did that. But the people were disheartened. They were in captivity, as Isaiah is describing it. They thought about their history. They felt like they had been mistreated. The second point in your outline says the Lord is, I will give you another question to write as a subpoint, and that question is, have you not known? Have you not known? This is the perfect aspect of Hebrew. The first one is continuous, incomplete in the sense that they're always saying these things. This one is in the perfect aspect and said, have you not come to know these things? There has been a time that you have come to know a lot about who God is and about his character. And so he asked them rhetorically, have you not known? Have you not heard what? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. And then it'll describe how that applies in just a minute. But think back on all that John Gustafson referred to last week about the omnipotence of God, the omniscience of God, the great creator who set all the stars in the sky. If you look back at verse 26, lift up your eyes and see who created these. He who brings out their host by number, calling them all by name, by the greatness of his might, and because he is strong in power, not one is missing. You have learned these things. So why do you say what you're saying? Ponder again, just briefly with me, that he is the everlasting God. He is, in a sense, the eternal present. God is there in the midst of every circumstance over all time. Whatever the circumstances are, whatever the past has been, however the present is unfolding, whatever the future holds, God is eternally present in any and every circumstance. Do you not know? The everlasting God is here, and he will be here. When I think of those women in the flood, the eternal, everlasting God was exactly present in that moment of time and in their lives. And people could well ask, God, why? But we don't ask, God, why is my way hidden from you? Why do you not care? Are you not able? God's moment by moment, everlasting presence. And actually in the Hebrew, how this verse unfolds is it's reversed in the word order. It says, the everlasting God, the Lord. So here the concept is the Lord who is the everlasting God, but the everlasting God is the Lord. And who is the Lord? We translate Yahweh. I think I've referred to this in one of my sermons, but in Exodus chapter 3 and chapter 6, it gives us God's revelation of his personal name to his people. And he says, I am that I am. He's the eternal present one. But read, if you would, those two chapters in context. He says, I am that I am, but I know exactly where you are. And he says, I've heard your cries. I've seen your bondage and your mistreatment. I've seen your despair. The Lord is the covenant God, the one who is everlasting, but the one who sees and hears and responds to his people. And he is also the creator of the ends of the earth. They are created for his purposes, and ultimately all of his creation will fall in line. Most of it will be recreated in new heavens and new earth. And the reality of hell will exist to serve God's purposes as well. But realize this is who he is. But Isaiah goes on to say, this is what he does not do. Read further. He does not faint or grow weary. Other translations say, he does not get weary or tired. His understanding is unsearchable. Why this? Why this attribute? God doesn't get tired. He doesn't wear out. He doesn't get exhausted. Well, that's an interesting bit of information. But the application is how he's going to apply that in his people's lives. But before we get to that, let me mention these two Hebrew words. And they're given of God, and then they're used to describe the reality of the lives of people. One is Ya'ap, and the other is Yaga. And I give you those Hebrew words to catch the assonance, the sound, the similarity of that sound. God does not Ya'ap or Yaga. He doesn't grow weary. He doesn't grow tired. Both these words indicate being overwhelmed by circumstances. To grow weary, to become faint, to grow tired. The first one has the connotation of inner resources being used up. Being weary, being faint. The second one conveys the idea of being worn down by the objective hardness of life. It has the idea in its root of gasping or being exhausted or just being totally worn out by the labor or the circumstances surrounding. God does not wear out. He does not grow weary. We'll see in a moment that humans do, but then he adds, his understanding is unsearchable. As we think about circumstances that are a mystery to us, and not only a mystery in the sense of being quizzical, but a mystery in the sense of why God allows and why we have to go through these things. Besides God not becoming weary, and besides God having strength beyond all things, we need to understand that the wonder and the mind and the purpose of God are beyond us. We're so thankful for what we know, but He sees over all of eternity. He sees human history stretched out over time. He sees kings rise and fall, and nations come to great power and then fall apart, and God's hand is involved in those things. God understands all of it in the minutest detail and accomplishes His will. And we need to understand there are things that we just don't understand. And then He applies this to us. And C on your outline says what He is, He gives. And so notice in verse 29, He gives power to the faint or the weary. And to him who has no might, He increases strength. Why did it say that God doesn't run out of energy or grow weary with His resources being sapped inside of Himself, or the circumstances in creation just being too much for Him? Makes us smile, doesn't it, to think of that? But the reality is that's what happens to us. Our internal resources wear out. Our human strength wears out. The circumstances that surround us are too much for us in our humanity sometimes. But God takes what He is and gives it to us, especially His strength, to enable us to live on a different level, to experience life in a different way. Notice it says in the specific illustrations that he uses, even youths shall faint and be weary. One of our grandkids, one of our Minnesota ones, so we get to see him quite a bit. I think he's in the 90th or 95th percentile in his height for a 7-year-old, and he was when he was a 3-year-old as well. And he looks a lot older than he is. But this kid has a motor in his body that just will not quit. They used to live, my daughter and son-in-law, in White Bear Lake, and one time we were walking just on the north side of White Bear Lake along the homes in White Bear Lake. And as we were walking along for a considerable period of time, this little guy, Leighton, ran the whole way. We could keep up with him by walking fast, but he just kept going and going and going. And when you think of youth and the energy that they have compared to what most of you have, should I include me? Yes, I rollerbladed yesterday and biffed on my elbow. So more energy and stamina than we have. Leighton would go home and sometimes just emotionally fall apart. He'd start crying. He was a 3-year-old. He is a 7-year-old. And he's a sweet kid with an amazing amount of energy. But there's a point where he wears out and sometimes in his emotions just falls apart. Notice the next phrase. It says, and young men shall fall exhausted. And youth refers to either sex, children, boys and girls. Here it uses the phrase for young men, but it's more than just young men in the connotation of this word. You might say choice young men. And the idea was used for boys or young men who had natural athletic ability. And so the Greeks would see that in the lives of these young men and designate them to be trained for the Olympic Games. And so here is this category, and it says, even these choice young men shall fall exhausted. And so the Lord is saying, in all of our lives, there will be times and often when our human resources just wear out and they're not enough. Physically, we get so exhausted. Life beats on us. Relationships and other means affect our inner resources and in our strength. And so the Lord knows that about us. And in verse 31, it gives the alternative. But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Those who wait upon the Lord. The NIV says, those who hope in the Lord. The New Living Translation says, those who keep trusting in the Lord. The word has different connotations, but most of the translations translate it wait. That's not hard to do. I mean, that is hard to do often in our lives. And realize that Isaiah is writing to people who will be in captivity as this is fulfilled. The northern kingdom of Israel had already been taken into captivity by Assyria. The southern kingdom of Judah would be taken into captivity in 586. And he is writing to them, and he says, but those who wait upon the Lord shall gain New American Standard says, gain new strength. Will renew their strength. What kind of waiting is that? It's the kind of waiting that builds God's strength into your lives. It's not waiting, doing one of those fidget spinners, or it's not waiting, pulling up the game on your phone that you do when you don't have anything else to do or when you should be doing other things. It's not that kind of waiting. It's waiting in a spirit of trust and dwelling on the reality of who God is and building your strength as you wait. Those who wait on the Lord will gain new strength. And he gives 3 examples. One, he says, you'll mount up with wings like eagles. We're fortunate enough to have an eagle's nest in our neighborhood. And there have been several little eaglets that have been produced through there. But sometimes the eagles fly right over our house. Sometimes with the wind currents, convection air, or whatever it's called, the eagles just spread out their wings and soar and go higher and higher on the wind currents. As they come close and they swing by, they are just majestic and awesome in their flight. And it says those who wait upon the Lord and who don't say, Lord, why is my way hidden from you? But trust in him, will, in a sense, have strength that is unbelievable, as if you can soar like an eagle, as if you would grow wings and take off and fly. Those who wait upon the Lord will find themselves in these circumstances that are wearing themselves out and finding themselves like an eagle beginning to flap his wings and rise above that and soar. Could that be in our circumstances? God says it will be. Or he says they will run and not be weary. They'll run and not be weary. That's impossible, isn't it? They'll run and keep running and not be weary. I had a friend, and when we lived in Iowa, I was training for the Boston Marathon. He had to get to a certain point in his times, and he was from Boston. He could never make the time, but he ran and ran and ran. I have a couple other friends in Stillwater who are running in, is it 100-mile or 100-kilometer mega marathons. They keep running and running, but eventually they wear out. Here it says they'll run and not become weary. Do you remember, some of you do, probably a lot of you do, the movie Chariots of Fire? And Eric Liddell, who was born in China to missionary parents, he and his brother, he was about 6 years old, came back to England to be in boarding school there and eventually went to university in England. At his university, it was recognized that he was probably the best rugby player and cricket player in the school. He was Scottish. He became known as the fastest runner in Scotland. You know, in the movie Chariots of Fire, he said that he would not run a heat in the 100-meter race because it was being held on Sunday morning, and he said because of his commitment to Christ, he wouldn't participate on that on Sunday morning. It was the day to worship his Lord, and he wouldn't violate that. And then I think this is maybe a little artistic license, but in the movie, they show Eric Liddell in a church with a very large pulpit. Eric Liddell is standing in the pulpit, and he begins to read the scriptures. And as he reads the scriptures, they cut to the Olympics going on, and men struggling and toiling, and in the steeplechase, falling in the water and falling headfirst on the track, and just straining men from every nation. And Eric Little read, "Behold, the nations are like a drop from a bucket, and are accounted as the dust of the scales. Behold, he takes up the coastlands like fine dust. All the nations are as nothing before him. They are accounted by him as less than nothing and emptiness. The Lord who brings princes to nothing and makes the rulers of the earth as emptiness. Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. But they who wait on the Lord shall gain new strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary." That scene in that movie is phenomenal to show the stress and the tiredness and the weariness and, yes, achievement, but to recognize the Lord is the one in any and every circumstance who provides strength that only he can give in a way beyond others who don't know him can't experience. By the way, in the movie it showed that he opted out of the 100 meters and then was given an opportunity to run. I think it was even in the 440. I think it was yards by then because it was an international competition. Actually, he found out many weeks before that he was going to run in that race. So he practiced the 440. His times weren't very good. When he ran it in the Olympics, he ran 2 seconds faster than his fastest time ever and won the gold medal. The Lord provides even physical strength as we trust him. And then the last one is just that you will walk and not faint. Seems sort of anticlimactic, doesn't it? You'll mount up with wings like eagles. You'll be able to experience a strength and an ability to be living above your circumstances in a way that's just supernatural. You'll run and not be weary. You'll walk and not faint. Well, walking is what we do all the time. Running is occasional. Mounting up with wings like eagles is occasional. Walking through our daily lives is what we do all the time. And in all of our circumstances, our great God, who allows us to mount up with wings like eagles and walk and not be weary, allows us to walk through whatever our daily circumstances are and not be overcome by them. Let me read you a couple passages before the team comes up and closes us in song. Here's a part of our everyday lives and what we're called to do. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It's not arrogant or rude. It does not insist in its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It doesn't rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. In the book of Galatians, referring to what the Spirit does in our lives as we trust him, the fruit of the Spirit is, you want to say it with me? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. will walk day by day, strengthened by the Spirit of God to accomplish what the Lord has for us. I just thought as I was thinking about this morning of a mom with a newborn baby who doesn't want to sleep at night, who gets up very often, or who has colic. And we raised 5 of them. Some were easier than others. But I remember sometimes Jeannie and myself in the middle of the night taking care of babies who just didn't want to stop crying and seemed to be in pain. And I remember praying, Lord, make them stop. And sometimes he didn't at that point. But even in that, they who wait upon the Lord will renew their strength. They'll mount up with wings as eagles. They'll run and not be weary. They'll walk and keep walking and not faint. Let me ask the worship team to come up and close this in song. Not only do we know the great God of the Old Testament, but we know God revealed Jesus Christ, our Savior and Lord, so personal to us. 'Tis so sweet to trust in Jesus, just to take him at his word. Please stand.